Good morning. We're going to begin a brand new study, Domain 8 of Native Americans, Regions, and Cultures. And we're going to talk about how Native Americans originally, many thousands of years ago, migrated to North and South America. How did people get here in the first place? So first we need to know on which continent we live. We live in North America. And we're going to be learning about the earliest people, the earliest known people to have lived on North America. And we call them natives, Native Americans, Indians, American Indians. And you'll hear about how these people became to be known as Indians. But in this domain, we will probably refer to these people mostly as Native Americans. And why are these people called Native Americans? Because they're the earliest known residents of the continent of North America. You're going to hear several names to different groups and tribes of Native Americans, but we can't know for sure what some of these early people called themselves. We don't have their language. We will hear more about that as we learn about each region and group and tribe. Many scientists think that Native Americans first arrived on the continent of North America thousands of years ago, how they lived when they first arrived, how they adjusted to different environments, and how over time they started to form tribes with other people who shared similar languages, customs, beliefs, and traditions. So here is a picture. And imagine a time a long time ago. So long ago that we can't say for certain when. In this ancient time, people began to move from one land to another. These prehistoric people were nomadic hunters who traveled in groups. These prehistoric people began to move from a land we call Asia into the land we call North America. They did not plan to move from one land to another. They were simply following the herds of animals that they hunted for their own survival. And it's thought that various groups of people ventured on foot across a vast cold area between Asia and North America called Berengia, following herds of prehistoric animals. Now, other people also bumped in little canoes along the coastline that was clear of ice and followed hunting also as well. They were hunting sea mammals, whales, sea lions, and seals, as well as catching fish. And people came walking, following large animals, and people came in boats. Historians think that the very beginning of this migration of ancient Asian people began during the last major ice age. It was during this ice age that large areas of the Earth's water were frozen. At that time, northern regions of North America were covered in thick sheets of ice and giant glistening glaciers. As you heard earlier, because water had turned to ice during the ice age, sea levels had dropped and certain areas of land had become uncovered. Many scientists think Berengia was one of these areas. As these prehistoric people moved across Berengia, they lived and hunted in this icy world. They followed and hunted great herds of large mammoths, mastodons, giant bison or buffaloes, saber-toothed cats, and giant ground sloths. These large mammals were known as big game. All of these animals were prey for the people who migrated or moved from Asia to North America. The Berengia migration is a widely held theory among historians, but it's almost certainly not the only way people arrived in North America. It's also likely that people came to North America in boats, following the coastline in search of land and food, and then stayed because they discovered an abundance of new resources. This migration of people and animals did not happen all at once, nor did these people come from only one place. People moved from across Asia into North America over a period of time. However they arrived, these are believed to be the very first people to inhabit North America. Eventually, as the climate began to warm and the ice-covered land began to thaw, it became possible to travel even farther into North America. Giant glaciers that had blocked native peoples' paths melted. People moved south through an area that opened up between two enormous glaciers. Scientists call this path between these glaciers the ice-free corridor. This corridor or passage was cold and wet, but habitable. And so large numbers of native people continued to migrate or move in small groups, just as before. They lived a nomadic life as they followed the herds of animals that they preyed upon. In order to survive in this way, these native peoples had to be expert hunters. Although we do not know much about this period of human history, archaeologists have discovered a variety of spears, including leaf-shaped spears embedded in mammoths' bones, in addition to tools for scraping and carving bone. It also seems that prehistoric hunters used a spear thrower. This device was a short rod with a hook on the end. It's called an atlatl. It enabled the hunter to throw a spear or dart with a great deal more accuracy and power. And it's also believed that these early Native Americans learned how to domesticate dogs so they could be used to help them hunt and travel. We can only imagine what life must be like for these early people as they endeavored to survive in a cold world by hunting creatures such as the 9-foot-tall woolly mammoth. With nothing more than a spear and stealth, they would have hunted in groups to take down their prey. A woolly mammoth would have provided many pounds of meat as well as fur, tusks, and bones. A band of hunters and their families would most likely have stayed with the carcass or dead body of the animal until the food supply ran out. In addition to food, the animals they hunted provided these native people with clothes. Archaeologists have discovered artifacts and other evidence that tells us that animal hides were stretched out to dry and afterward were sewn together with tools made of rock or bone to provide either clothing or a form of shelter. As the Earth's climate changed and it became warmer, the way these early people lived changed also. Gradually, many prehistoric animals that had been hunted for their meat, fur, and bones disappeared from our world forever. Were they hunted to extinction by people struggling to survive in a changing world, or did the climate change alter the delicate balance of the food chain to such an extent that these mammoths could no longer find the tools they needed to live? We will never know for certain the answer to these questions. We do know that the saber-toothed tiger and the woolly mammoth no longer wander this land, whereas other ancient creatures such as the buffalo did survive. It does appear that some animals were more able to adapt to climate change than others. The buffalo, for example, is thought to have become smaller and swifter over time. Once the ice was gone, new plants, grasses, and trees emerged, and various animals adapted to a new diet. Native people adapted too. They found other smaller prey to hunt, such as deer and rabbit, as well as new varieties of fruits, nuts, and seeds to gather and consume. These prehistoric people looked even more to the oceans, lakes, and rivers for sustenance and a means of transportation. Both people and animals adapted to their environments. Throughout this domain, you'll be hearing how different groups of Native Americans adapted to the environments of the regions in which they settled. Excuse me. And so eventually, over many years, people moved right across this vast expanse of land to various regions, to the wide open grasslands of the Central Plains, to the northeast and southeastern woodlands swamplands, and coastal regions, to the sun-drenched west coast and the dry southwest deserts. People settled in the far north regions of the Arctic and subarctic. Some people moved even farther south into what we now call the continent of South America. Eventually, many people chose to no longer live nomadic lives, but instead chose to settle in one place and establish permanent or semi-permanent settlements. They may have decided this because they discovered regions where the food supplies were plentiful in the form of animals to hunt and fish and plants to consume. In addition, there were natural resources such as fresh water to drink and wood or other material that could be used to construct homes and build cooking fires. The temperature in some regions may also have been temptingly mild. One thing that is certain is that many native people began to farm, though they had previously survived by foraging for wild plants in addition to hunting. Native people began experimenting with planting and harvesting, and they eventually began to grow a variety of crops. Because of this, some people chose to stay in one place and by their collective efforts increase their own food supply. Over time, approximately 500 North American native tribes came to inhabit a wide variety of regions across North America. These native people, whose total population peaked or reached its highest number at about 20 million, would live their lives according to their own customs and cultures for thousands of years until European culture brought extreme changes to their way of life. So we've been talking about prehistoric people. What does prehistoric mean? Well, it refers to someone or something that existed during a time before people started writing down history. And what's the name given to the area where many scientists think that Asia and North America were once connected by uncovered land? That would be Berengia. And did the people of Asia plan to migrate to the continent of North America? No. Why did they most likely migrate across Berengia, according to scientists? Well, they were following the herds of animals that were their prey. And what were some of those big game animals that the early Americans hunted for their prey? Woolly mammoths, mastodons, giant bison or buffalo, saber-toothed cats, and giant ground sloths. These prehistoric people were nomadic. What does it mean to be nomadic? It means that you move from place to place, often in search of food or water. And why did many of the early Americans decide to stop being nomadic and choose to settle in permanent or semi-permanent communities? Well, they moved into regions where the food and natural resources were plentiful. They were able to remain in one place to hunt animals and gather fruit, nuts, and other plants to eat. And eventually they began to farm in these areas in which they settled. If these events were all prehistoric, so there was no written record, from whose point of view do we know what happened? Well, archaeologists' point of view, based on their discoveries and artifacts, and oral histories passed down through many generations of these Native Americans. How do we know the Native Americans were expert hunters? Well, archaeologists have found a variety of spears embedded in the bones of woolly mammoths. So how would you compare and contrast the nomadic Native Americans to those who settled in one place? Comparing is saying how they're the same. Contrasting is saying how they are different. So nomadic groups moved around, hunting and fishing and gathering to get their food. And the groups who settled in one place began to farm the land, growing crops. All right. Thank you.